Look, I don't think that the United States wants to get involved in Afghanistan militarily. Again, 20 years was a long time. And there is no appetite within the American public, and certainly not within the elites on both sides of the aisle, to get involved once again in another major military mission, specifically Afghanistan, which we the United States knows inside out how difficult it is. So I just don't see that happening. And then there are other ways of checking China's nuclear capabilities. You don't need Bagram of all places, and it's sort of in an area that would require heavy airlift and supply lines and so on and so forth. And if you remember, the NATO supply lines were always an issue back when U.S. forces were in Afghanistan pre-2021. And that was a source of tension between Pakistan and the United States. So I just don't see that happening. Look, I mean, clearly there is something else that is intended. I mean, U.S. forces going back in, I just don't see that happening. But there may be some other things that need to be done in Afghanistan that he's trying to sort of find his way, or the best way to achieve those. Recently there was a visit by U.S. officials, one of them being the former envoy, Trump's envoy to the Taliban, Zalmay Khalilzad, and he met with Amir Muttaqi Khan, who is the Taliban foreign minister. And so there is some conversation taking place, but it just doesn't make sense for this to be like a military intervention. So there is some form of relationship, because keep in mind, Afghanistan sort of sits at sort of the border between Central Asia and the Middle East, and of course South Asia, parts of it, that are part of U.S. Central Command, headquartered in Qatar. And so this is their AOR. So if you're going to be involved in Central Asia, you're going to be dealing with China, you need to deal with Iran, there's a relationship with Pakistan in the making, and so on and so forth. You can't sort of ignore Afghanistan. So there is something that is happening that's not really apparent, but I don't think it's as big as, hey, we need Bagram back. Because why? Because we need to counter China's nuclear capabilities. They're both. One doesn't need to happen for the other to be achieved. I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So, I mean, I know that a lot is being made in the Pakistani press and the broader international press about, because of its timing right after the Israeli strikes in Qatar, targeting Hamas officials in the Qatari capital of Doha. And so there, a lot of people are saying, okay, this is sort of, brings Pakistan, one nuclear weapon state, in sort of contact, if you will, for a lack of a better term, with Israel, because of this mutual strategic defense pact. But I think that I think we're overlooking something here, which is that first, Israel has there's no intention to, go after Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's just not in the Israeli interest. On the contrary, they want an Abraham Accord with the kingdom. And the kingdom, along with the Gulf states plus Turkey, are not part of sort of the operational sphere of Israel. The operational sphere consists of two rims. The inner rim, which are the bordering countries with Israel. You start from Egypt, you go up to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. Those are the countries. And then there's a second tier of countries that are a bit further afield, which includes Iraq, Iran, and then Yemen. And Yemen because of the Houthis and their relationship with the Iranians. And so, this is what the Israelis are focused on, and they're more worried about. The Saudi states and the broader Khaliji world and Turkey is just they don't view it the same way. I mean, there may be, a potential clash, conflict between Turkey and Israel in Syria at some point, but there we also see them managing that, and and quite frankly, the whole attack in Qatar, uh, at this point seems like a one-off, seems like an exception to the broader rule that the Khalijis are not going to go that far. And it was one of those decisions that was made. And since then, the president of the United States has said to the Emir of Qatar that, this will not happen again on your soil. So I just don't see that happening. So going back to Pakistan and Saudi, I think we're jumping the gun here. I think there are more issues that are more immediate for the Saudis, for which they need the Pakistanis, which is there's a new need for a new regional architecture, security architecture, and we can go into those details. But I think this is more broader than just Israel, and I think the conversation is so narrowly focused on what happened between Qatar and Israel. So we have to see how what is the American strategy? The American strategy is a global one, and that strategy is basically that, look, from 1945 until recently, the United States was doing the heavy lifting in terms of security for pretty much the whole world, and that is changing to a new paradigm. The new paradigm says our allies and partner nations in various regions will take the lead in security in their respective regions and will be helping them. So we're going to go into a secondary role. The primary role will be of the players there. So we see this in Europe and the whole commotion of what's the future of NATO? How do we deal with Ukraine and Russia? And the Germans are thinking about their own strategic plans. The Poles are doing the same thing. The French, the British, and so on and so forth. In the Middle East, the United States is basically saying to Saudi Arabia that, look, you and Turkey are our two pillars that we're relying on. And then, of course, there's Israel, but Israel, is more concerned about its own security as opposed to sort of, what happens in the region. So we need you to take the lead on that. So I think this is in keeping with, the American expectation. Now, it's not exactly what the Trump White House or any US administration would want, because it leaves out Israel. So there is a Saudi-Turkey understanding on Syria, and there is this military alliance or partnership with Pakistan. So regional players taking the lead from the point of view of the White House is great. But the wrinkle in this is, okay, so what about Israel? Because ideally, it is the Abraham Accords framework that the White House has been pushing, where, okay, Israel, Turkey, Saudi, and the others sort of all, it's a balance of power, if you will, dynamic that the United States wants to achieve. So with this move, it's not exactly what the U.S. had hoped for, but it's in keeping with the broader logic, with the way which the United States is now approaching security in different parts of the world. I think that, look, those are two separate things, and I think that we shouldn't think of the Pakistani-Saudi agreement as the be and all of everything. I mean, think about it. If the Saudis are, if we play this logic forward, what the Saudis are doing is basically saying, we used to rely on the United States primarily for our national security and regional security. Now we have to do it ourselves. We don't have the capability. But does that mean they want to put all their eggs in one basket, in the Pakistani basket? Do they want to be so dependent on one player? I don't think so. I mean, and if you're Saudi and you look at Pakistan, so right now things are looking, on the upswing. Things are improving in Pakistan. There's political stability, relatively speaking. The economic financial situation seems to be, on the mend. and U.S. Pakistan relations are doing well, and China-Pakistan relations are good. So things are looking good. But what if a few years down the line things don't look so good for Pakistan? What if Pakistan is so mired in its own neighborhood that it doesn't really have the bandwidth to help the Saudis? So what I'm trying to say here is that I don't think that the Saudis are this is just the main event, if you will, of their plans for regional security. It's one component. It's not trivial by any means. It's pretty significant. But I think that there's more to it that we'll see unfold in the months to come. So I don't think so. I think that we have to understand what are the U.S. security guarantees. Is the United States pulling its Fifth Fleet from Bahrain? No. Are we pulling our bases out of the region? No. Are we, pulling out of Qatar where there's central command? No. And so I think that's still going to be there. But this isn't about sort of U.S. presence. This is about U.S. involvement, if you will, and the level of involvement and how much heavy lifting that the United States wants to do. I think before we get to sectarian divides and before we paint this in religious terms, Islamic or otherwise, I think there is a much more fundamental question that needs to be asked. What is the command structure going to look like just between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan before we get ahead of ourselves? So let's say, I'm just gaming it out here. Let's say that a key component, I don't know if this is in the plans, but it would make sense if this happened, is that Pakistan commits a multi-divisional force, task force, to the kingdom, deployed in the kingdom for various missions and whatnot. Well, who are they going to be reporting to? Will they be under Pakistani command? Will they be under Saudi command? So what does that chain of command look like? What are the rules of engagement? All of these things have to be sorted out. These are sort of the practicalities, because at the end of the day, deploying military forces beyond your borders is, as much an art form as it is a science. There's certain details that need to be worked out, and not certain, a lot of details. So, and I'm not talking about who's going to pay for it, that's important, but operational details. And so, but the biggest question, and this is something that is plaguing the Europeans as well, with this sort of, thinking beyond NATO, that if there's going to be a European collective defense or security arrangement in the future, then, will the French be leading, or the Germans, or the Poles, or the British, or the Italians? What's that power sharing mechanism look like? It was easy under NATO because it was the US and everybody followed the US lead for historical reasons and obviously for economic and military reasons as well. But that's an anomaly. The only thing that came close to that was the Soviet Union's Warsaw Pact. And it wasn't a very effective alliance to begin with. This is very different. And it's also uneven. It's not two countries sharing their military forces. It's not the classic mutual security agreement, bilateral treaty, because the Saudis don't have forces. If they did, they wouldn't be asking the Pakistanis for a military alliance. Likewise, Pakistan is cash starved, and that's what they're after in this relationship. And so, in other words, there are a lot of details that need to be worked out before we get into sort of, is this going to be sectarian, or is this going to involve others? Let them figure out, between themselves, and then, the Turkish complexity can be discussed. So those are two separate questions. So the first, it's really unclear. I mean, so Pakistan is now heavily reliant, somewhere close to 80% of its hardware, on China. The procurement is coming from, is basically Chinese hardware. The Saudis use American weaponry, largely speaking, for the bulk of it. So in some sense, there's a lot of American hardware that theoretically the Pakistanis will have access to, not just theoretically, practically speaking, because if they're going to be doing, helping with the Saudis and they're going to, deploying a force in the kingdom, then it's not like, oh, these pieces of equipment are off bounds and you just have to work with this. And it doesn't work that way. So there is sort of, the access or being able to operate those American systems that Pakistan does not have right now. It could be that, the Saudis, part of this arrangement is that the Saudis will say, okay, the Americans want, to sell weapons. If they're ready to sell weapons to Pakistan, but Pakistan doesn't have the financial capability to purchase them, then we'll pay for them, through a grant, through loans, whatever. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of permutations and combinations that can happen. But I think that it's going to be, we just have to wait and see. There are just so many things we just don't know at this stage because there's so little in the way of details. As for, the divisions in Pakistan and how this will sort of, I don't know. I mean, look, Pakistan is a pretty complicated place. I mean, you look at it from the point of view of the provinces, you look at it from the point of view of the various political factions, you look at it from the point of view of ideology, and just economic disparity. So to pull the nation together around national security, it may work. I mean, we're in sort of really fragile times. Look, the country just went through an 87-hour war with India, last May. I mean, this was a few months ago, and there's always fears that we could see, another round of that or multiple rounds. So maybe this national security atmosphere stays. I could easily see, if this thing doesn't go well, there'd be criticism from the public saying, what are we getting out of it? Why are we, involved in this? How does it benefit our national interest? And so right now, I think it's just sort of the excitement, the euphoria in the country that this is something new. Pakistan is now, punching above its weight, and it's going into a new league, geopolitically speaking. But this is all new. We don't know where this goes. No, of course. I mean, look, one way of looking at it is, look, you didn't make this decision to look like you're not enjoying the moment. Of course they are. I mean, look, they are making a big deal out of this because it's signaling. So what's in it for them? Look, it's unlikely, as I said earlier, that that a Saudi-Israeli conflict breaks out. I just don't see that happening. There are just so many arresters that can prevent that. Now, people will say, oh, but look, they struck Qatar. Yeah, they did. It was a few missile strikes, and it was a one-off thing, and it was over with. It's not like a long war. And that's because Hamas people were there. With the Saudis, they have a completely different attitude, the Israelis. So what is it that the Saudis are trying to achieve? Well, one is Iran, looks like it's going to be on the path towards, regional and international rehabilitation, especially after, the supreme leader passes and there's a new supreme leader and the political evolution that's been going on inside Tehran. And there has to be some sort of a rapprochement with the West. There has to be an understanding. And that will lead to Iran becoming a bit more stable. They'll be able to do a bit more business with the world. So Iran won't be isolated. So the Saudis have to factor that in their calculus, in their long-term strategic calculus. So they're not a military match for from a humanware perspective, for the Iranians. And so they need this. And this is why they're securing themselves for that. There is the other thing is that Turkey's influence is that now that Iran's influence has shrunk, Turkey's influence is expanding. And Turkey is a former colonial, overlord of the region, the Ottoman Empire. And so, yes, right now things are looking good, but it's not in the Saudi interest or the broader Arab world's interest to have, disproportionate influence control by the Turks. So the Saudis are bringing Pakistan to their side and signaling to the Turks that, hey, here's the boundary. They're setting up a sort of like a boundary and saying, this is how it's going to be. So this is more signaling. So yes, they have to be, they have to appear enthusiastic